All right. Hello, everyone. I think you can all hear me okay? So I'd like to welcome you all to the Shared Concepts Workshop. And I have the agenda on the screen. I'm hoping that you can see the agenda there for day one. We have split the workshop into 2 days. Our first day today and the second day after will be on Thursday. So I would like to welcome some of our sponsors, especially TC211, and I will be introducing the chair person of TC211, Agneta Enberg, and she will say a few words and a welcome, and also Peter Parslow, who is the chairperson elect for TC211. And myself, I am Reese Plews, and I am the Terminology Maintenance Group convener inside of ISO TC211. So I'd like to welcome you all today to the workshop, and I want to thank you for your interest. And if that's okay, I will let Agneta say a welcome message here. Thank you, Agneta.
Yes, thank you, Reese. And first of all, greetings to everyone. I'm so pleased to see so many participants here. Well, thank you, Reese, and all for letting me introduce myself. My name is in Swedish Agneta Engberg. If you want to twist it a little English, it's Agneta Engberg. That's the the least English adaptation, and then you can go further. Agneta Engberg, I'm the chair of ISO TC211, as Reese mentioned. So just to say a little bit about TC211, I suppose many of you are already familiar with the committee, but maybe equally many of you are not. So this is well, it's an old committee. It's a large committee. I'll come back to that. But the committee is about 25 years old, and it has first been run by the Norwegian national body and the Norwegian mapping agency for about 20 years, and then for the past 5 years, it has been run by the Swedish Secretariat, the Swedish Institute for Standards, and also then myself as chair coming from the National Land Survey of Sweden, which is called Lantmäteriet. So for 5 years, it's been in the hands of the Swedish people. It's a large committee. We have about 80 standards, I think, which is published. But more important, we have, well, equally important is that we have very many members. We have 37 participating member countries participating through their national member bodies. We also have 33 observing members. And apart from this, we have very many liaison organizations, both internal within ISO, different ISO committees, but also other organizations. And we have a special relationship, we could say, to the OGC, Open Geospatial Consortium, which we cooperate in at very many levels. So we have also, to organize all this, we have actually 19 permanent groups, working groups or advisory groups. So this is ISO TC211. I would actually take the opportunity to, I thought about this shared concepts and terms. From my perspective, what I'm working with now and what is important for the committee also, I would just like to share some thoughts already in the beginning. There's two things really. First of all, ISO TC211 is deeply involved in supporting the UNGGIM, which is the expert committee on global geospatial information management under the United Nations. So the UNGGIM, I'm sure most of you have heard of it. So we are together with OGC and IHO, the International Hydrographic Organization, supporting UNGGIM, or actually the member states, to build up standards as a part of the national framework. And this supporting the UNGGIM has very many also parts in it, but actually for the moment we are working with the third revision of the standards guide, which will probably be an online version. And many of you already are involved in this, Reese, Jan, and Ron, I know, concerning terminology. So this is one area where I think it's a possibility to promote the use of terms and concepts through this new standards guide, which will be hopefully broadly used. The other thing I would like to mention is that I'm sure you all agree on that geospatial is not all about traditional mapping anymore. I mean, it hasn't been for a long while, right? But it seems that this evolution is going quicker and quicker, where we not only see the use of location in public administration data or smart cities or intelligent transport systems, as we have talked about for a while, but also now health and other areas that we maybe not at all have touched upon before. So I think this is also an opportunity, both these things, the UNGGIM work, which is mostly about geospatial and statistical, but also all these other domains now that we need location data. I think this is the time, this is the right time to really gather our forces, our knowledge, and unite ourselves to work as one geospatial community and to help others actually. So therefore, I congratulate you on this workshop initiative, and I wish you the best for these 2 half days. So Reese, did you want me to introduce Peter as the
yes,
chair?
yes, Agneta, I think that'd be very nice. Peter has registered and joined the workshop. Yes, please do.
Yeah, yes, thank you. So as I said, well, I didn't say actually, but Sweden has had the Secretariat for 5 years, and the Swedish Secretariat will continue with Mr. Mats Olin as committee manager, but there will be a switch of chair as at the end of the year when I will retire. But we are very pleased to have a really great solution for this. We have Mr. Peter Parslow from United Kingdom. He has now the role of chair-elect, which means that he is the coming chair. And Peter will take over at the end of this year. So from 2022, Peter Parslow is the chairperson. So Peter, please, Peter, turn on the video and mute. Yes, and you have a long history in the TC211 also. So please tell us about it. And thank you for me.
Yes, briefly. So thank you for a very nice introduction, Agneta. So yes, from January next year, I'll be taking over as chair of TC211. So at the moment, I start learning what that means from Agneta, sort of transition. For the last few years, I have convened an advisory group in TC211, which looks to get consistency between the standards and standards projects that we have. So that's my role there. Too long an introduction. We won't have much time left for Reese's business. So I'm not just a new chair, but I'm an old hand in a way as well.
Peter, thank you very much. Agneta, yes, thank you for the background and the nice introduction to the workshop today. So yes, I think we'll get started now with our first presentation. That will be coming from one of the organizers. This is coming from the Danish Agency of Digitization and the Danish Agency for Data Supply and Efficiency. My colleague Heidi and some of her colleagues will be making the presentation there today. Heidi, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, good day. It is Jan who will start, and I will be clicking through the slides.
Very good, thank you.
Several people presenting, yes.
Thank you very much. As just was mentioned, this presentation is a cooperation between our agency for digitization as well as the agency for data supply and efficiency. And you can see the 5 of us who has made this presentation by pictures. So we'll see what, well, let's go on. Click next, please, Heidi. What I'm going to talk about here is that we'll just give a short presentation on what's the problem with terminology and cooperation, and then we have some issues about cross-authority coordination, and then the international challenges. And we have divided this presentation in 3 parts, and it will be given by 3 different persons. So you will hear a little bit from all of us. So next, please. Well, what's the problem? What is really the problem? That is what I'm going to try to describe here. Well, the problem is that we have different definitions for the same concept. If you look at what ISO TC211 have, ISO TC2184, Dublin Core, and DCAT, they have different definitions of the same concept. And well, that could be a problem when you try to do some cross-border, cross-domain, cross-organizational work. So you would like to reuse the same issue, the same elements, the same concepts from different organizations. So it would be nice if we have one definition. That is some kind of nirvana. So we have to do something else. And then you could, of course, have to try to reuse the definition 1 and then add some notes so it makes clear what are the context, and still we have a problem that needs to be solved, and we have run into that in quite a few projects at our own within our work in Denmark. Next, please. So we have, as a result of this problem we had with our own work, we have tried to make try to define a new definition, as you can see here, and with some notes, actually quite a lot of notes, trying to give different angles to the same definition. And we also produced some kind of discussion paper that was circulated among OGC, W3C, and ISO TC211 to see what are the feedback, what are the result of such a proposal. And I know dataset is not the only one that should be harmonized. It's just one example, and it could be used as a test case to see that that you have a way through. But we got some feedback from that. Next, please. So we got some feedback, and this feedback from our discussion paper was actually could be grouped into 3 parts. You have tradition, where there's a way you usually define a term, a concept in an organization. That is one thing, and also there's we used to do this. And another feedback we got, well, this definition is not taken from developed by us, but we're taking some elsewhere. And then last but not least, we also have different ways of developing terms. You have one way that is done according to ISO 704. That is one way to define it. There are other ways to define definitions and propose and show them. And then there's a personal taste, and that could be a little bit tricky, because as soon as we get into some personal taste, it's not, somebody say, not hard science anymore. But nevertheless, there is some kind of personal taste when you present and discuss terms and definition, because whenever you sit around the table and discuss how it should be defined, there will always be someone who's saying, well, I like that one better than that one. And then we are back to the personal taste. So either way, you have to take that into consideration when you develop terms and definitions as well. And then we also realized there's a difference between what you can find in standalone glossaries and what you can find embedded in glossaries. And the last one is actually something that we realized when we looked at how we do the data modeling in Denmark, where we have defined some rules, which we covered later on, how to develop models, and they should be well defined, well described, with all the elements, so you have to use the definitions and terms that can be found from elsewhere, because they should be able to work across domains and, well, perhaps also borders. So there's different there. And then of course you have the one you can find in standards, as I mentioned, standalone glossaries like the online browsing platform from ISO or Geolexica from ISO TC211, where you have some standalone glossaries where they've collected all the terms, all the definitions, etc. But still, they need to be interoperable some way. Next, please, and hereby give the word to our digitization agency.
Yes, just wanted to take a step back and briefly dive into the approach we've taken in Denmark of establishing a framework for this cross-authority coordination in terms of how to model concepts and data. Well, it's easy to see, how different domains have evolved differently and different traditions have appeared. But in order to support interoperability, we really need to gather our forces, as Agneta said, and work together in a uniform way and build upon each other's expertise and upon each other's models. But in Denmark, we found that concept models and data models were really not often published or shared or reused. And if they were published, they were not really heterogeneous and rarely linked together, possibly with the exception of the basic registry data models, but generally they weren't heterogeneous. And generally, little attention was given to definitions in data models specifically, making them hard to interpret or reuse. Next, please. So as a consequence, as Jan mentioned, we established a common set of rules for concept and data modeling based on three key principles, and that is to model domain oriented, and that would imply creating solid foundational models anchored in the relevant domain and approved by domain experts. It also implies being able to define in a structured manner, independent of application context and one specific use case or one specific IT system, because we need this to work across organizations. It also implies using model elements, and I know this is the catchphrase of the EU's ESA² program, but this really facilitates immediate interoperability and hopefully also rather than to start from scratch. We really want to avoid silo thinking. We want to avoid duplicating work. And finally, document this in the same way, being uniform across models, across authorities. And these rules apply to both concepts and data models, as we see them a very important coherence and connection between them, which we will come into. So next, please.
Yes, and here we have a very small example of the visual aspect of a concept model, a concept diagram, which is a simple visualization of the important concepts and their relationship with each other. And we found that these diagrams, they can really help facilitate the dialogue with the business people, the concept or modeling experts, and they help facilitate the talk that then result in the good definitions that are, of course, an essential part of the final complete concept model. Next, please.
And that basically meant that we drafted 28 rules, model rules covering different aspects. We won't dive into all of them here, mainly rather those very relevant for concepts. And many of the rules will basically reflect good housekeeping. State what is the model, who's responsible, when was it created, modified, and what status does it have. But the rules also put a bright spotlight on concepts and good definitions, which has been the core pillar in terminology work and concept modeling, and also benefits data modeling too. So naturally, it's a requirement that all data elements and concepts have a definition, but also that this definition should ideally be a concise, intentional definition, starting with a subordinate concept, followed by its delimiting characteristics. And definitions should be written to cater for or allow for reuse, following best practice of writing definitions in a structured way. forms the basis, but it's also important to look out for elements that might express undesired limitations or bindings of that concept. We really want to try and avoid adding technological, organizational, political bindings into our definitions. So we really want to make it very clear in our rules that definitions are not the same as usage notes or application notes or scope notes. They have to be separate from that, and the supplementary information should not be an integral part of the definitions, as they need to work in a cross application context. Next, please.
Yes, and so we want to share a few observations that we've made during our work. Part of it is dissemination of the models is extremely important, because of course they only get the full value when they are known and used and reused. And to do this well, the diagrams matters that show the relation, not other things that help our examples and notes. They help the process. And it's also, while the diagram is useful, it's also very useful to have an overview in a text or table format that can be searched and ordered and copied from to really, again, facilitate the reuse. We've also experienced that our stakeholders have very different levels of maturity. Some people have no experience with formal concept modeling pretty much whatsoever, whereas have years and years of experience with modeling. And we have to have a framework that can sort of encompass both of those target groups. We also see quite often that modeling and terminologies are not actually done in-house, it's outsourced, which means that both the skills regarding modeling don't exist within a certain organization, and a lot of the decisions about what to call something or what the exact definition is sort of also removed from the core responsibility of the business, which I kind of think is a shame. Next, please. So also a few observations about the difference between our national situation in Denmark and the sort of international situation here. We're lucky enough to have a situation where a lot of concepts, they sort of belong within a specific domain, and that domain has a specific authority that controls it, or has the right to define concepts within that domain, at least in a public context. And of course, there are some concepts that are relevant across domains, which are the ones we are especially concerned with. But we are then lucky enough to have a organization that publish model rules. We do reviews of models when they are about done, so we can comment on the quality and to which degree they actually follow the modeling rules. And we have some forums for discussion where we can hash out our differences, so to speak. Whereas on an international level, we have a lot of different actors that some are across many domains, some have different sub-organizations that maybe aren't completely aligned, and there's not one domain, one authority. There are several authorities that might be interested in several domains, and there are no sort of supernatural or super organizational organization that can be a forum for hashing out differences and those sorts of things. So the solution to the problem might well be different on an international level. Next, please.
Yes, so how to tackle this international challenge? So today we are in a situation where we have a lot of undocumented relations between concepts, or perhaps we have some ad hoc alignments of concepts. Perhaps there was a project that created a proposal for an alignment, but when the project has ended, then that alignment is not maintained at all. The ideal situation would be a situation where all terms and definitions are harmonized across organization and domains, but that is probably a utopian ideal, and we can only do that for a limited number of concepts. So could we perhaps set the level a bit lower and set the level somewhere in between? So could we find a way so we can align concepts, either mutual alignment or perhaps sometimes one-way alignment. And that implies that those alignments are approved and maintained. So to come back to the dataset example, what we think we need is we need to have explicit relations between those concepts. So we need to identify the relations, we need to approve them, we need to publish them, and we also, very important again, we need to maintain those alignments one way or another. So when we think about that, a lot of questions arise. And let me maybe start by saying that us, the presenters, we do believe that the technology to support these kind of things is there. So we actually would like to focus on, you know, the governance. How do we do this in and between organizations? So a first question is, well, what could a process for mutual alignment of concepts look like? As Agneta already said, in ISO, there is a tradition that the technical committees have liaisons to other organizations. So there is already some kind of cooperation there. And with some organizations, we have a very close cooperation, such as with OGC. Is that a place to discuss this? Do we perhaps need new networks, new fora, perhaps a new organization? What is it? How could we do this? A second question is, well, when do we need mutual alignment and when is one-way alignment appropriate? Mutual alignment would probably be good when we're talking about aligning concepts between two standardization organizations. So there is some kind of official approval from both sides. Whereas if a national organization is aligning with an international one, perhaps one way is the highest achievable, for instance, because of the language. That might not be English in many national organizations. A third question we have is how to deal with this set of links. Is that part of the original glossary or terminology, or is that an artifact in itself, meaning it has its own life cycle, its own approval and publishing process? The fourth question is how to document these relations. The case of a relation between concept A and a concept B that says, well, that is the exact same concept, that is rather trivial. How do we deal with those many cases where concepts are similar but not exactly the same? How do we document the differences between the concepts? Because this is very interesting to know for end users. And the more we think about it, the more questions will probably arise. So let me just finish by saying that we really look forward to hearing your thoughts about this. We're looking forward to seeing all your presentations, and we hope we'll have a very fruitful discussion in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you. That was very, very interesting presentation, and it really sets the theme for the workshop that we're going to do today and on the 15th. So I'm not quite sure that we want to take questions really at this time, because we allocated a lot of time later in our meeting for questions. So if everybody's okay with that, I will give the next presentation here. So when I opened the workshop, I told you that I was the convener of the terminology maintenance group inside of TC211, and so that Agneta gave you some information about TC211, and she told you how old it was and when it was started, and the people that are involved, the participating national bodies, those kind of things. And we've got 83 published standards. This gives you a little bit of the information and shows you the structure of the TC that Agneta had mentioned. You can see the terminology group here. So myself, I represent Japan inside of TC211, and terminology, along with some other groups, are what we call our advisory groups. So, and this gives you a little bit of layout of the TC. So The terminology maintenance group that we had, uh, it really, these discussions started in 2001, and the group was established in October that year. For many years, until 2017, the group had one convener from Australia, Mr. Andrew Jones, and then from 2017, I took over after Andrew retired. So there are three basic tasks of the terminology maintenance group. So the first one is the maintenance and harmonization of the terms within the TC. We review and assess those terminology records in TC 211's draft documents, maintain this terminology repository. It has all of the terms, the draft terms, any of the terms that have been worked on for any project. And we work to ensure that we've got consistent terms, definitions and concept systems that are in use in all of the TC211 standards and technical specifications. So, of course, we engage in comments, submitting comment resolutions. That's how we make changes to documents after ballots and those kind of things inside of the ISO structure. We have discussions and we have feedback directly to the project leaders and the editors. The second task that the terminology group does is the publication of terminology. That we disseminate the current terms and the definitions to all the TC members when we work with the TC members to create a translation of published terms. So, and the third option, we work on some cross-domain vocabularies, and we're trying to work with other groups to identify cross-domain terminology issues. So within TC 211, so there are two standards that deal with terminology. We have a 104 and 146. 104 is a terminology document. It specifies requirements for collection, management, publication of the terminology, and a framework for our repository. So this document does not aim to create all of the terminology for all the standards. So the terms for the standards are in their individual projects, in their individual documents, and we maintain this repository that is maintained for those terms. So 146 is a cross-domain vocabulary. This establishes a methodology for cross-domain mapping of these vocabularies. And this specifies an implementation of one other standard within TC211 called the Registry Standard 135. And this is how these entities are registered and some governance issues, those kind of things. So we also, I mentioned about the repository. So the main work of the terminology maintenance group is this repository that we have. Presently, the repository is based on Microsoft Excel. It's a workbook with 6 spreadsheets, and there are over 230 defined attributes across various spreadsheets there. And since the inception of the group, approximately 630 documents in various forms, from a CD or a draft international standard, draft technical standard, and published standard have all been processed into this repository. So there are basically about 2,500 active terminology records that exist inside the main part of the repository, and there is an archive with over 13,000 superseded variations of draft terms that is contained in this persistent archive. So you can get like a snapshot and see what the groups were doing before, if anybody had defined a term maybe before and took it out of a document. And so it's possible to check those kind of things. The processing tasks, there's a lot of management tasks that go into the maintenance of this workbook, this repository, and this is handled through a series of Visual Basic macros. But of course, with any kind of macro or these kind of things, there's a lot of human intervention and the decision process still required to do this processing and the management. The repository is closed. We don't allow the repository outside of the group, and the the TMG convener takes care of this repository just because of the nature of Microsoft Excel and those kind of things. So it's really, it's a one-person sort of job here, so to deal with that. And the picture gives you some idea of what is shown there. So um, these primary products that we have, we distribute, as I mentioned, a snapshot from this repository. We distribute that quarterly to the members of the TC. That's a closed distribution through an NDoc. You have to be a member of the TC to be able to see that, because there are draft terms inside of there. We've distributed 68 editions of that spreadsheet. So, and we give input to the project teams. Basically, we submit between 10 to 20 comments per document that we process, and over 250 documents have been commented on in the lifetime that we've done the terminology maintenance group. So, as I mentioned, there was another product of the terminology maintenance group, and that is the multilingual glossary of terms. The multilingual glossary of terms contains the published terms from all the TC211 standards. Those terms are, of course, in English. And then the TMG works with the national body members and to receive translated terminology entries. We started this multilingual glossary in 2006. Since then, we've had 5 releases periodically every couple of years. The most recent release was in June of 2020. There are about 1,064 English terms, and there are over 7,000 translated entries in the glossary in 14 languages. For many years, the glossary was distributed as a Excel workbook, but recently we've been working with a company there that is assisting us to create an online version. So we have an online version of the multilingual glossary, and this is based on a software platform called GeoLexica. GeoLexica is developed by a company called Rebos, and we'll have a presentation from Rebos later in our workshop. And you can see this image on the screen here of the multilingual glossary of terms. You can go there and look at it. You input a concept, the term, and you get the English plus listing of different translated languages. So there's also, because this is online and people want to use online, these kind of things nowadays, we have a JSON API and some different output APIs that we're working on with Rebos.
1 minute left.
Thank you, Jan. So we've got content identical to the multilingual glossary. So the content between both of these is going to be the same here. So, and it works out pretty good that way. So, and I think that's the last slide there I've got. So I just wanted to tell you that the TC has been really active in the maintenance and engagement for managing terminology. We the TMG, and we've got about 70 to 80 members in the TMG. Some are very active, often commenting on documents, and we have a really good rapport with all of the project leaders, the conveners of the working groups. We get really good support through the committee manager and the support team at the Secretariat's office. And so these kind of things really help us to maintain really well-managed terminology within the TC. But it is a lot of work. And so you have to keep on it and those kind of things. And so we'll talk more about some of the issues that we run into this week. But I hope this gives you an introduction to some of the work that we've been doing in TC211 for these kind of things. So I'm going to stop there. And I think we have a break coming up, if that's right, Jan?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So we have our first break. We wanted to put breaks in for everyone and give you, we have a 10-minute break now. And so after that 10-minute break at about 10, let's take 10 minutes for that break. And we'll start about 5 minutes before the hour. And we'll have our next presentation by Eric, Professor Stupkar. I will mute my microphone, and maybe I'll leave, I will stop the recording and then try to remember to restart it. So, okay, thank you all. All right, well, I think we're all back, and if you're returned from the break now, we'll have our, this will be our third presentation today, and this is from Professor Erik Stupkar from Denmark. Eric?
Yes, hello.
Hello there.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, I thought I had turned that on. Yes, you should be able to share.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, great, Eric. Yes, please go ahead.
1 minute, sorry. There you go. And here. No, sorry. What's so? Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. My topic is the case of Calate, how we use Calate in the context of structured referencing between domain thesaurus, international standards, and large controlled vocabularies. The Calate thesaurus is a work which Dr. Volkan Saktas from Department of Geomatic Engineering from Yildiz Technical University in Istanbul and I have worked on. And the domain is cadastre, is land administration and property law. And this domain can be viewed from different perspectives. We can have perspective from walking in the field, finding boundaries of land, and from the database in the offices. And my view is preferably the view from the field, the boundaries, etc. We have, Volkan and I have made some joint publications, and I would like to mention that in this month, we published in Land Use Policy an article, and what I tell today is documented there. And you should be able to use the link for free until 24th of April. So my agenda is introduction to the Thesaurus Calate. Why did we focus on code lists? Issue led to the problem of two concept schemes because we have code list in one concept scheme and the thesaurus in another one. And the problem is how can we manage two related concept schemes? This is the main issue. And then I'll just mention another issue related to the Bartok server. So Calate was introduced in 2011. It was based on the ISO land administration domain model, which was a draft then. And then in 2019, the OGC land and infrastructure conceptual model was added. I mean, the concepts from the land infra was added to our thesaurus. And then finally, also in 2019, we added code list partly from Land Infra and a few from LADM as well. And the domain is land, it is parties, it is the owner, the professionals involved, it is legislation, it is information, say on spatial units, it's on survey, how you measure in the field, and it is on activities, the processes involved in property. And it's not a big thesaurus, about 250 concepts. And from the very outset, it related to concepts from other thesauri, from agrowork, from the environmental thesaurus, GEMET, and from the thesaurus for economics. That Calate is available from Cadastral Vocabulary org, and it offers an alphabetical listing, a graphical overview, which you can look yourself, and introduction to the different versions. So Calate is encoded in the SCOS, according to the SCOS accommodation. It is Volkan who advised us to use that and actually also to implement it at his university. It's fine work. We have the pleasure that Calate is available also at the definition server of OGC, and it offers, for example, a concept hierarchy. So the content of Calate is revealed here. You have activity, which is detailed into exchange of property rights in property formation, that is the changing of boundaries, and in transfer, then saying gifts and heritage. Then we have code list, and we have information and documents of different kinds. Just to give you an impression of the content. We've been invited also to present the Calate at the Bartok Cosmos server. And there you have another view of Calate. You see to the left the top concepts again. And here you have also the code lists, the ISO LADM code list. There are only 3: group, party type, party role type, and party type. And we have also Land Infra code lists for land and for surveying. So this is another way of addressing. It's available worldwide in this way. So why did we introduce code lists? Well, code lists supplement the classes, attributes, and relations and methods of UML modeling. Code lists have names, and the code list for each name consists of a number of values. And in this present context, the values are terms. So this problem is that the ISO land administration domain model has to be supplemented by national profiles to allow for LADM implementation, because differently from land infra, there's no infra GML-like encoding. And this means that the national profiles could be quite diverse, and the use of the thesaurus could assist as a mediating platform. And that was the reason why we supplemented Calate with the code lists. The code lists are described in the standards in the following way. Left you have from LADM, the party role type. Efterhand we have seen this list before. And inland infra vi similarly har code list, the code signing role, the owner, the land surveyor, seller, buyer, or neighbor could each in their different roles sign a document. And how to provide that, in how to structure that information in a way which is related to the thesaurus we already had. That is the question. So our consideration was that the code list names and the values, they address the same the same domain as a Calaic vocabulary. And therefore the objective was to integrate the code list names and values as far as reasonable into the thesaurus as ordinary concept with broader and narrow and, if possible, definitions. And this is what we did. Some code list values are added with prefix LI for land infra and LA for LADM in order to provide a context for possible alignment between the standards. Now, if the code list value is a term which cannot be properly defined, for example, other party doesn't make sense out of the context of the specific code list. So this value is not added to Calaic, but is recorded only in the code list concept scheme. So we ended up with two concept schemes. We have the opportunity either to use concept schemes or concept collections, but the arguments and the consideration and tests made us end up with concept schemes because they allow for more flexibility and they allow the recording in one set. We also choose to put the two concept schemes into one file, and I've quoted here the start of the code list part with another argument why we would use the concept scheme. When presenting this combined file in the new version of the definition server, it showed some problems because the first activity, administrative unit, association, and cadastral party does not specifically belong to the code lists. And this is not so perfect as we would like to see it. And this is then the problem we are facing today. The rendering of the content of two concept schemes within one file has caused troubles. And how can these be redeemed? So how can you refer between different concept schemes? Because I have asked, and at the bottom, is cross-reference between Calaic and Calaic code list needed? And my answer would be yes. I think that it is too close. There must be, but is a Scots formalism available for such referencing? I'm very much open for your proposals for that. Or maybe somebody has found an ad hoc solution which we could apply. It has to be mentioned that not all hosts have reported a problem, so we could ask host editors how they did it, because it seems that it can be arranged. Well, this was my main problem, my main message. How shall we organize concept schemes? There's another issue, I'll just mention it in briefly. The basic register of thesauri, ontology, and classification. I just mentioned the Galat is recorded there as well. And I would very much like to see that the geospatial community is better visible. And I'm glad that Jakob is present here. Maybe he could share some ideas about that. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much. Yes. So a very detailed presentation with a lot of good good discussion topics there that we can work on during the discussion. So thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Very good. And I'll let you stop the share.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we're doing well on the time. Our next presentation, if everything is going on schedule here, is going to be about ISO Smart, the ISO Smart project and terminology. And this will be delivered by Ronald C. from Rebos Company.
Hi, Reese.
Hello, Ron.
I am ready.
Okay, very good. I think you can share the screen there, okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks. So first of all, thank you very much to everyone who has attended. I'm very glad to see you here. It has been a long journey in arranging this workshop together with Reese and Jan and Heidi. So glad to be doing this here. So today I'm going to mainly talk about smart terminology. Smart is this new kind of concept in ISO and IEC where standards can be machine readable and machine accessible and potentially interpretable. So our company Ribos deals with interoperable semantics, and what we really mean from that is that when someone writes a requirement or someone creates a standard, that information is faithfully delivered to the user who actually uses that, whether it's for compliance or for certification. So we want to make sure that the semantic path is clear and unambiguous. We work with a number of different partners. You might have used something we have worked on. And the reason why we are into concepts is that it permeates through our work. So we have the Metanorma standards authoring suite, which is an open source publishing toolchain for creating model-based standards. And it is often used to create terminology standards. So for example, ISO 34000 is a terminology standard in ISO. And we also deal with concept registers. We serve the GeoLexica framework, which is the host of the online MLGT, as Reese has mentioned, as well as the OSGeo glossary. We also have a concept editor called Glossarist, which is used for managing the MLGT, amongst other things. So now we're really going to smart. So what smart is, as defined by ISO, is a class of standards that are machine accessible, readable, and transferable. What this really implies is that the standard itself is not text. It is a data set of different data classes. So we're talking about data models, data items that are fully normalized and potentially have relationships to each other within the standard, outside the standard to other standards, or perhaps to the physical world. So these standards, there are a couple classes of them. So there's the terminology smart, there's registry smart, there's data models, source code, as well as requirements. So these things cover data models, including model data, instance data of objects. You also have model-based content, which are things that attach themselves to models, like annotations or guidance text, as well as semantic content. We've been working with SMART since its inception in ISO and the SAGMRS and the Machine Readable Standards Group, and we are also actively participating in IEC's Standards as Database pilots. So together with ISO TC211, especially its terminology management group, we have been involved in the Smart Terminology pilot. This is a project that has been approved by ISO's Technical Management Board sometime last year. And the project name is called Multilingual Glossary of Terms Geolexica, which is managed by the TMG of TC211. And what this does is that this is the only smart terminology pilot that has been approved. And the intention at ISO is to utilize this project to develop smart terminology knowledge, as well as best practices, so as to explain and guide other ISO or IEC TCs on how to create smart terminology, how to make terminology that is actually data-centric and can be reused for its users. And in particular, this pilot covers both the terminology and registry classes, because the MLGT is basically a glossary or a set of concepts managed in a registry. So the pilot gives us a couple of things that we have to do. So first of all, we need to define the processes. How do you manage a smart terminology collection? Where does standardization happen? Does it happen on the attributes or the concepts themselves or the relationships? And how do we manage changes that happen, whether it's to the data, to the mappings, or other things? And similarly, we have to deal with guidance of the requirements. We have to create some guidance on what does it mean by smart terminology? What is not smart? How do we make terminology smart? And what kind of technology do we need to make things smart, to facilitate the development of smart terminology standards? So going back to the SMART definition, we've got standards, machine, and A stands for accessible. So we need to make sure that terminology items, concepts, collections are referenceable, they're usable, they have to be readable, meaning that they have to contain rich content, including semantic units, math, as well as rich text, as well as the different kinds of schemas that apply to concepts like ISO 10241 Part 1 and the concept hierarchies in ISO 704. And we also want to provide multiple readable formats for different implementations. People use concepts for many different things, and we want to provide that ability for them to utilize them. Smart terminology should be transferable. So we, as much as we can, we advocate for open data, as well as bulk and offline use, so that you can actually stay offline, but you can still use the terminology. And likely someone who's using this, you don't want to be locked to certain APIs or technologies or implementations. For SMART, we also apply the T to terminology, and we need to make sure that the terminology is available. So you have the version of concepts and any related metadata, as well as relational. We want to make sure that you could link concepts within each other and perhaps even relationships to relationships. And last but not least, it's a governance process that links all of these things together. So thanks to the Smart Pilot team at TC184 SC4, JWG24, which works with OpenCDD, which is also an ontology standard, as well as a data management standard. They have provided us with a template on standardization of terminology. So how this works is that you've got a terminology proposer sends in a change request where there's a management group that handles the process of validation and determining the outcome. And at the end, a smart standard gets updated with a change request. So in terms of progress for the pilot, we are on our way progressing to smart. So we have the machine readable part. We have compliance with the existing standards, including 19104, which is terminology registry, 19135 part 1, which is the registry standard, a general registry standard. We have now provided concept relationships in SCOS. There is concept versioning, and it also supports change requests. Next on, we have to develop, we are in process of developing process guidance, as well as strategy documents that are supposed to be for ISO TCs. And in terms of technical implementation, we're also looking at creating the relationships between version concepts and also detecting, automatically detecting relationships based on the content of a concept. The software that we use to enable this to happen is called Glossarist. It adopts a number of concept-related standards for management, as well as for term structure, data structure. It uses a Git-based storage and collaborative data entry system. If you would like to have a look, go to this website. And on the right side is actually a proof of concept demonstration for the IEC Electropedia. So before we end, I'd like to leave you with a couple governance challenges that we have encountered. This is an example of data from the IEC from the IEC CDD, the Common Data Dictionary. This is a manufactured example. Does not mean that it's reflected in real life, but so on the left side, what we have is you have a previous set of concepts with an existing relationship, and it transitions to the right side after the arrow, where you have new relationships, a modified concept, and it looks a lot more complicated because what has effectively happened is that we have inserted a broader concept in between the previous two. So instead of a 2-level hierarchy, we've got a 3-level hierarchy, but we also want to maintain the previous path where the previous concept with the previous attributes can still point to the new item, because in terms of a standardized register, we have a duty to provide to ensure that the data that has changed is still always available. So that's why when we deal with an evolving ontology, we also have to keep historic relationships as well as historic data. The second challenge that we've encountered, this is an example that I've come up together with Joe Goodwin of the IEC, the terminology coordinator of IEC. So here on the left side and on the right side, you have a definition from the IEV. On the right side, you have a definition from the CDD. They're both IEC technical committees, but they have slightly different definitions. And this is something that needs to be addressed. Not saying that they should be harmonized or they should be combined, or one should kick out the other, but something needs to happen for people to really understand that maybe these two actually mean the same thing. They're just different faces of the same concept. And similarly, this is another comparison between IEV and 60617, which is the symbols database of IEC. Again, they have slightly different definitions, slightly different terms. They need to be harmonized in one way or another. And last but not least, these are some thoughts on governance. There is a potential way that we could build in governance into through mappings. So one proposal that we have thought about, for example, would be having a common concepts or a semantics registry. We could deduplicate concepts in an organization. We could build mappings between these concepts. And on any changes that come in, we could have a coordination group that deals with the understanding of those changes and any vetting that's necessary, and the acceptance or modification of the concepts or of their relationships. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and I hope the outcome of this workshop will be something that is useful to all of us, as well as the science of the shared concepts. Thank you very much.
Ron, thank you.
Thank you, Reese.
Yes. I think that that gives us good on the time. I appreciate that, Ron. So we will move to the next presentation here. So this is going to be by Guy Peng. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, and we see it. That's great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Guy Peng. I go with Peng. I'm a senior research scientist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. I'm also a co-lead of an international fair dataset quality information community guidelines working group. And I'm one of the co-chairs for information quality cluster of Earth Science Information Partners, as well as the expert team on information management of WMO that stands for World Meteorological Organization. I appreciate the opportunity to present, and it's not going to be sharing about expert knowledge in building a glossary, but challenges in finding appropriate definitions for the key terms we need to use in our work, and also trying to bring our perspective in developing common terminology and concepts in reporting quality information at individual data sets level. Dataset quality information includes information about quality or state of data, metadata, and documentation through the entire life cycle of dataset. As the working group, we're trying to develop community guidelines to help data stakeholders to curate and make dataset information fair, that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable as defined by Wiki at on 2016 paper. Immediately, we run into need to define key terms. I have a list of some of the key terms here. And the challenge we are facing from the start, one of the challenges is the fact the terms may mean different things to different people. With 22 international interdisciplinary domain experts, they bring in diverse expertise, experience, and knowledge from their own domain. Is a great, the body of expert knowledge. However, we also run into these challenges as articulated very well by the Dennis team, as well as Don Ron in his talk. For example, for accuracy, is that a quality attribute or that's an assessment type? Does it refer to accuracy of data value or metadata content or the data services? And the same thing can go to client, completeness and consistency, among others. This is the, even for the same term, as indicated by the Dennis team, there are many different definitions. I have a list 3 here, and ranging from a more scholarly definition to the ones we took by a data catalog that based on ISO and W3C standards, and also to a more domain-oriented. And I'm actually more comfortable with the last one because I can relate it to. As mentioned in the previous talk, there are many other definitions, and ranging from the whole spectrum of scholarly and to a layman's term, as demonstrated by Renell et al. 2010 paper and also OGC discussion paper. In a nutshell, the current state of shared terminology and concept in reporting dataset quality information can be summarized by the three different perspectives. One is a term may be defined differently. That can be from one organization to another, and we already see from previous talks. And even within one organization, there are different projects that they may define one term differently, and also the different terms may be defined for one thing. That also happen quite often. And then the third one is terms or concept are needed but not yet defined. So it poses big challenges, but I think also offer us an opportunity to harmonize or references, find a common approach to shared terminology and concept for the global community. For improved interoperability across domains, systems, and tools, it is fundamental, but I also think it's give us an opportunity to trying to minimize gaps between scholarly or domain discipline-oriented definitions. So this talk is more about bringing a user perspective. This slide shows a typical workflow for curating and reporting dataset quality information. It starts by defining quality attributes or dimensions and identify assessment method, perform the assessment, capture the result, and provide the result, make a result available to stakeholders, including users. In the next few slides, I'm going to provide a small scale examples in defining common terminologies. We first started by defining dataset dimensions and into 4 dimensions by science, product, stewardship, services. And for each dimensions, we identify 3 high prioritized stages. In addition to the dimensions and life cycle stages, and we need to define the quality information report types and quality metadata tags to represent the quality information to both human readable and machine readable end users. Of course, the last but not least is the metadata that ties everything together and cross quality dimension and cross life cycle stages. And this one, this slide shows a typical quality metadata reporting framework. Again, it touches on the needs to describe the quality dimension, attributes, and various aspects of reporting data quality information. Takeaway messages, dataset quality information is more than just information about data quality. And for improved data and information sharing, and the common terminology and shared concept are extremely important. And then the question is, should they be more scholarly defined or discipline oriented? Then the next question is how to best harmonize them cross disciplines for the fitness for purpose. Then the last one is the holistic approach should be adapted, not just through entire life cycle, also needs to be cross domains, different dimensions and different disciplines. And to do so, the cross-domain collaboration is necessary. I'd like to acknowledge International Fair Dataset Quality Information Community Guideline Working Group, and it's a lot to take on, and I'm looking forward to discussion, and I really enjoyed all the presentations so far. And if you are interested in our work and want to know more detail, I have some additional resource here. And you can also contact me by the email. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The data quality aspect is really important, so I'm very happy you were able to make the presentation for us today. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Ngo.
It's great
That's
to be
great.
here.
Yeah, thank you. So our next presentation.
We have a change here, Reese.
Yes, Jan, please go ahead.
Yeah, we have a change here because Volker Seifert from NATO will not be able to present on Thursday morning. So
Oh, I
he
see. Okay.
he and Thomas has switched place. Thomas Knudsen was supposed to give a presentation now, but he will
Yes.
give on Thursday, and instead of we have the NATO presentation now.
Yes, okay. And yes, that was a 20-minute presentation, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. That'll be fine. Thomas, thank you. We'll see you tomorrow, Thomas. So I'm sorry, on the 15th. So right. Yes, okay.
So sorry for the interruption.
No, Jan, thank you very much. That's great. And then this is a Volkert, right? Yes?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Please go ahead, sir.
I'm trying to share my screen now.
Okay, that yes, we see your slides.
Yep. Okay. Good.
And we can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good. Well, sorry to have messed up things, and hello from NATO headquarters in Brussels. So what I'll be doing in this presentation is to give you an idea of how terminology works in NATO. And first, I would like to talk a little bit about the background, and then I'll describe the terminology process within NATO. Well, you could ask, of course, why NATO standardizes terminology. There are very good answers to that question, both at the political level and also at the operational level. Because as you know, NATO, when forces operate under the NATO flag, they are national forces operating first and foremost from within a national context with national languages, of course. NATO has two official languages, English and French, but for many people, they are not the language that they normally speak. Now, in NATO, the responsibility and the responsibility for terminology lies with the subject matter experts. This is something that developed historically because soon after NATO was established in 1949, the various groups of subject matter experts got together to discuss for their own little domain whatever needed to be done to address the various threats from the Cold War. And so they soon discovered that in order to be able to communicate with each other, they had to lay down their own terminology. So this happened, and various glossaries, dictionaries, lists of abbreviations and definitions, etc., grew and developed, but there wasn't really any coordination. And that led to the situation that was recognized towards the end of the last century, that we had different definitions of one and the same concept. And this was a no-no within NATO. And then in the year 2000, it was decided that NATO documents must use NATO-agreed terminology, which begs the question, of course, what is NATO-agreed terminology and how is it developed? Now, this led to various other documents, two of which remain today. We have a terminology directive that describes the responsibilities of the various actors, the various people participating in the development of terminology in NATO, and also the procedures. And we have a terminology manual that tells the subject matter experts how they should coin a term, how to write a definition, how to create an abbreviation, etc., all based on the ISO standards for terminology. So we took those, tweaked them a little bit, simplified it for application within NATO, and that has now become our terminology manual, which is what we judge terminology by. So whereas we had a situation where there were lots of little islands without any, without much connection or direction, we now have, as a result of these documents, we have one process called NATO Terminology Program, that applies throughout NATO from top to bottom, left to right, north to south, etc. And we also have one terminology database, NATO term in English, Thermotan in French. The database, by the way, contains no classified terminology. You can just Google NATO term and use it. All the terminology in there is non-classified. So this is what NATO does to try to standardize its terminology, which means that we try to have the same terms and certainly the same definitions for the same concepts in all NATO documents. And that is a huge ambition, and where I think NATO set a very high ambition for itself, certainly in comparison with some other major international organizations. So how is this achieved? And I want to look now at the NATO terminology program, the actual process itself. But I would like to, first of all, point out that within NATO, we have a policy of separate approval of a document and the terminology that goes with it. The terminology for which the document is, if you like, the source document. It goes in parallel with the development of a document, but the terminology is approved separately. Let me just get back to the process, which actually it's quite a simple process, really, when you think about it. We asked that whoever wants to prepare a terminology proposal fill in a proposal form, and does so in accordance with the terminology manual that I mentioned earlier. And then they're supposed to send their terminology to the terminology office in Brussels at NATO headquarters, my office. And what we do then is the next step, we register the proposal and we carry out a quality assurance. We check that the proposals are written in accordance with the terminology manual, i.e. in accordance with the ISO standards for terminology. And we also try, if necessary, to involve other stakeholders in that terminology and ask them for comments on the proposed terminology. If the proposers, the subject matter experts that propose the the terminology haven't already done so themselves, because there's a lot of contacts, of course, between working groups where some of the concepts that they deal with are similar or just the same. I mean, like, for example, yesterday I had a meeting with munition safety experts, and what they consider to be energetic, or what they call energetic material, is what others would call explosives. And so that just shows that synonyms can offer some relief in trying to bring all these stakeholders together and to get them to agree on the same terminology. But when the subject matter experts and the terminology office finally agree on what the terminology should look like, the terminological entry, the terminology is then submitted to a NATO committee for approval by the member states. And once it's approved, it is then promulgated by the terminology office in the NATO term database. And in that way, it is shared throughout NATO, and it can be used in other NATO documents and reused. I mean, it's essentially just like, recycling of information. And so we always say that terminology is like the building blocks of a document. It can be used to build one building or write one document, but also another. And that way is actually, in that way is how we try to standardize terminology in NATO. And so we always say that NATO agreed meaning, the official terminology, is the common meaning or the common sense. And then, of course, it's also, because it's been approved, it's also the correct meaning, or le bon sens en français. Voilà. So just to come back to the idea of shared concepts, the subject matter experts in NATO are responsible for their terminology. They often socialize proposals amongst each other, even with other groups, other working groups. If they haven't, and the terminology office, the NATO terminology office, NTO, feels that there's that other people need to be heard, then we do so as part of the quality assurance of that of a proposal. And we do not have controlled authoring systems in NATO that force people to use approved terminology. Voila, this is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Volker, thank you very much. Yes, fascinating to see all the behind the scenes activity there that takes place in such a critical environment. So yes, appreciate you being able to share that with us today. Thank you. So
well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Okay, so I'll let you you can stop the share of your screen there, and then
Yep.
Yes, take your time. That's all right. So the next presentation we will have is by Peter Winstanley. Peter, are you here?
Hi, yes, I am.
Yes, hi there. Great. Thank you. Sorry about that confusion yesterday evening. So, but
That's okay.
glad we got it all straightened out. Okay. So, yes.
So, would you like me to share my screen right
yes,
now? And
I'd like you to run the presentation there, Peter. Yes.
okay.
Okay.
Right, can everybody see?
Yes, thank you. That's coming across well.
Okay, so I'm Peter Winstanley and I work for a company called Semantic Arts, and the presentation that I want to give today focuses on the question, is an upper level ontology useful? And I want to start by giving you a tale of two clothes stores, the wardrobe or the closet on the left and the drawer on the right. And we can have a look at the drawer and see from the top of it that there's perhaps some t-shirts there, but we can't really tell how many. There's something blue with a leaf on it. We don't really know what it is. Basically, without lifting everything out, we don't know what is there. Whereas in the wardrobe or the closet, I can have a quick scan and there's trousers to the left and then shirts of varying colors. And if we scrutinize them a bit more, we can see white and pink and gray and purple and so on. And then there's perhaps some suits or sports jackets. There's a sort of bag there, outer jackets. You get the idea. It's easy to see what's in the wardrobe. And the special technology that we use for this is the hanger. It's cheap, it's simple, it's very easy to use. And so it enables us to go from the challenging situation of having a look and not knowing what's in the drawer without doing an awful lot of work, to just giving a quick scan across the closet rail. And that's very easy. And the other thing that's easy about it is that if I wanted to keep like with like, I would just stick them on a hanger and I would know exactly where to put them. So the hanger is really important technology here. It's simple, it's easy to use. And if I start off using a hanger system, then I'm always going to be organized. Whereas if I'm in drawers, I've always got the puzzling questions of where do I find things, where do I put things, and so on. Now, let's go to the data domain. In the data domain, what we have is instances of data which are below the dotted line, and we make sense of those. We get meaning from the ontology or the schema that we use, and that's above the dotted line. And an ontology gives us meaning via different sorts of relationships. Some of them are class-subclass relationships, which are in the blue arrows here, relating Bobo the cat up into a hierarchy of classes: cat, mammal, animal, living thing. There are also disjoint statements. So an animal is not a plant. A living thing is not a living thing. And a living thing is not a non-living thing. And these disjoint statements can be shown by the double-headed red arrows. And then we can assign Bobo to be a cat via the green arrow, and Bobo's perch to be a ledge, which is a non-living thing. And this is the relation between the ontology and the instance data. Now, in exactly the same sort of way, when we have different chunks of data from different areas, for example, here on the left, an HR department, on the right, an IT department, we don't immediately have the possibility of kind of linking them together. But what we can do is create some common meaning by linking them to broader upper level concepts. And so we can say that we've got things that are kinds of buildings and personnel and countries and what have you. And we can then map the instances of data or the other different schemas that we've got in the HR department and the IT department to these common constructs. And that enables us to begin to see what is identical. We've got buildings, we've got personnel, and we can also say more about it. So for example, the country with the ISO code, we know it's a kind of geo-region from this upper level ontology. And in doing this, what we're enabling us to do is to sort of snap the data together from the two different areas. And so you can see that in a way, the hangers are these green shapes which have got the upper level ontology. And that, of course, enables us to do federated queries very, very easily, because we just say, well, tell me what buildings have we got or what personnel? And the query can then automatically go down through the class hierarchy into exempt employees, hourly workers, users, blah, blah, blah. So you can see that hooking things together via an upper level ontology is really useful. Now, The next bit is, now that we just go around the obvious stuff, don't let anybody tell you that this is easy. Retrofitting an upper level ontology to existing terms is actually very, very tricky. It can be done. It requires a lot of work. It's what companies like Semantic Arts are exceptionally good at, and that's why we get employed to help people integrate their data. But better off, start off with an upper level ontology. You've got to be careful. You have to recognize this thing about ontological commitment. You've got to be able to commit to the chunks of ontology that you are dealing with. And this is something that we have to take into account, whether we're retrofitting or starting with an upper level ontology. But of course, when you're starting with an upper level ontology, what you've got is the right sort of materials to understand correctly what the inferences are, what the commitment is to the ontology that you're using. So the benefits are that you're going to have these explicit set of semantics. The other thing about it is that you're going to be able to make bringing in information from other areas much, much more easy than it would otherwise be done. And you can also make benefit from things like federated queries and queries coming in from the upper level ontology, as I was describing earlier, which mean that you can do things in a much faster way than without the upper level ontology being in place. So if upper level ontologies are so helpful, which one should I use? Because there's actually quite a number around. There are some based on common sense or very lightweight, large scale ontologies, Psych, Sumo, schema.org. There are other ones that are perhaps a little bit more terse, a bit more compact, like Dolce Light, BFO. GIST is the one that Semantic Arts use. It is one that is basically directed towards enterprises of both public and private sector. The Italian government in their El Norte have got a very, very terse upper level ontology, but it's really great to have everything hooked into that. Makes all the benefits of an upper level ontology available. Here's an idea of what GIST looks like. There's 143 classes, something like nearly 1,700 axioms. It's the sort of thing that anybody can get their mind around. It's compact enough, and yet it covers fair breadth and enables you to hook most things when you're talking about sort of enterprise work into that ontology. Go have a look at it. You can find it at semanticarts.com/gist. It's available on a Creative Commons attribution share alike license. But if you want to buy it because you want to do something out with the particular license requirements, then you can do that as well. These are the types of top classes that you've got. Here's a small selection. If you just take a look at those, you'll find that there are a whole number of things that you've got in your area which could be mapped to those. So you see that it's quite broad and it's easy to recognize the sort of things that you would be dealing with. A lot of people here would deal with place or event, but obviously category, it's the sort of thing that we've been talking about with the NATO talk on their taxonomies. All of those are category terms. Moving on. The other thing that's really beneficial about starting off with an upper level ontology is that you stand on the shoulders of giants, because much of the heavy lifting has already been done. All the things that determine the sort of axioms that are used in order to describe the relationships between the classes, the equivalent classes, other things like that are already done for you. So there's a considerable amount of heavy lifting that you can pretty much take for granted. The other thing that's easy to deal with here is that you can all, in a distributed way, in your own different domains, start off from the same upper level ontology. And so portfolios of systems, ontologies that enable cross-domain interpretations to be done later on are so much simpler if you start off with an upper level ontology. So the recommendation here is, yes, an upper level ontology is very useful. You can retrofit. It's tricky, but it's doable. But the practice recommendation is start your ontology development by extending from an upper level ontology. Which one? Any, just use one. Use GIST, it's there for you. Thank you very much for your attendance. If you want any more information, that email address will get you in connection with the company where you can find out about GIST and how we use it. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you. Yes, thank you for the presentation there and the information about the GIST and those kind of things that we might be able to look at in the future. Take a look at those. So we did a little adjustment on the schedule, and before our discussion, we have a break. So we'd like to take a 10-minute break, and it's on the hour right now. So about 10 minutes after the hour, we'll come back and we'll start our, we have an open discussion planned, and Heidi and some other folks from the organizing team will be trying to put some things together, and we'll be working with that open discussion. But we look forward to all of you participating, and we have a lot of really neat discussion topics and questions and things from the chat. So we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we'll be starting the meeting shortly again after our break now. So we placed some information in the chat there about how to use Zoom. I think everybody's probably, from looking at all the comments in the chat, I think you're all very expert Zoom users. So I don't see any problem with that today. And it's just really common there, at least for those of us in TC211, that we really like to use the raise the hand function. And a couple of us will be watching the list there to make sure that we don't pass over anyone if you do have a question. So be sure to keep your hand up. And there is some information in the chat if you want to look on. There's a couple different things there on the participants window. You can raise your hand that way, or there's another way through this through the reactions pop-up there. So I think I've said enough, and I'm going to stop my share, and maybe I'm going to let Heidi, if she has anything to share right now, or she might just want to start the discussion, but Heidi will take it from here. Heidi?
Yes, thank you all, and thank you a lot for the very nice presentations and the good discussion already in the chat. So yeah, the question is where to start. Well, I've seen a lot of discussion on, you know, on the first presentation on alignments, on mapping. Who will do the mapping? Who do we trust? Who is authorized? So I would suggest that we start there with the discussion. I'm just looking through the list of participants because I was wondering if Max Dekkers is still online and if he maybe could start out. I'm just not sure he still is on the line. Doesn't seem so.
He has left because he has another meeting.
Okay. Perhaps Peter Parslow, you've also said quite some things in the chat about this. Could you maybe start and perhaps summarize or elaborate on what you said there on this topic?
Yes, okay, Heidi. You might hear a small dog in the background occasionally, but don't worry. So, yes, I was sharing my views sometimes in the chat, and I think that it seemed to me there's a potential for going one of two different ways, or possibly some way in between, with one way being a kind of top-down sort of discussion, which you can achieve in a domain like NATO, I guess, where you can say, you know, we're all, you know, a defined set of parties, and we get together in assorted groups and we agree terms, and then we adopt those terms, or terms for concepts. I think there was a side conversation in the chat about the fact that you can have many terms for the same concept, but sometimes those are subtly different things, and there's a lot of complexity there, particularly across languages. But anyway, the point was you can have these top-down approaches, or you can have more of a bottom-up approach where it's actually then more about authority. So if I individually say that my meaning of the term data set is the same as your meaning of the term data set, that's just an assertion. If I've agreed with you and we both agree that those two terms are the same, or they describe the same concept, then that is a stronger assertion, and we would probably both make it. And it might be much more achievable to work that way, a lot of bilateral conversations, than to try to have a very wide-ranging group of people agree a particular concept. That was my view, which I've been chatting about in the chat. So this is to say, I think it's really important and good to do, but I think the most effective way of achieving it in a reasonable time would be what I call bottom up rather than top down. And Rob, over to you.
Rob Atkinson, please go ahead.
Hi, people. Yeah, Rob Atkinson from the OGC. Yeah, so just thinking about this, I think there's two really important aspects here, and I think we can get ourselves tangled up if we conflate them, because they're both really important topics. One is the semantics of the mapping and all the subject matter experts and how to get them involved in that. And the second is the general issue of where and how to assert these things. From the concept of a standards organization, when we publish standards, it's quite often when we build standards, we explicitly identify the mappings in the standard. The terminology is being mapped to external things, and that's actually brought out. So when we publish something, those mappings naturally belong within the set of information we publish. In other cases, you're doing mappings, and we do projects, we do machine learning and all sorts of things, looking for correlations, and there's all sorts of possible suggestions, or people saying, look, for our purposes, we think this is the same. So you can have a whole range of different levels of authority for those mappings, and they're all still useful, and they can evolve over time. So it's actually an architectural question of where are those mappings published, so that the system as a whole, these things can be accessible, because they can't necessarily be, not everybody is going to maintain a model of the entire world inside their database. We have to be able to support distributed systems, and it's hard to work out. Well, I mean, there are approaches, but we probably need some canonical means to find where these mappings may exist, so that we can actually start building federated approaches to sharing these terminologies.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to comment on what has been said so far? Yes, Jipeng?
One thing I'm afraid is that if we manage to agree on one definition, it may not be practical to anyone anymore. It's correct, it's true, it's just so abstract. And I'm wondering whether there's a way to capture nuances, but at the same time, we reach some kind of community consensus.
Thank you. And there's also a comment from Eva Maria. Please go ahead.
Yes, with respect, Ron, we from TC37 would be pleased to assist you. I don't know if you know that TC37 is dealing with language and terminology. So we produce the horizontal standards, which are the basis for terminology standards like ISO 704 or ISO 860. So maybe there can be some sort of liaison formed between TC37 and TC211.
Thank you. I actually have one question to that. I know this. Well, I know that there are standards in ISO TC37, and I've read some of them. I was wondering when you said also in the chat, you know, you have some standards on how to harmonize. I was wondering, does that also include what we talked about in the Danish presentation about creating relations, or is it about the process to actually end up with one common definition?
Actually, in TC37, we deal with both things. In SC1, we make the standards, which are the basis, like 704 and 860 harmonizations of concept and terms. And in the other SCs, we deal with the practical implementation.
Okay, thank you. More comments on this topic? Ivana, you were also very active in the chat. Would you like to add something on this?
I'm not sure what to add. Thank you, Heidi, for the presentation and for the seminar. But I'm not sure what to add here, because I know there are links from all sorts of technical committees at ISO, and also I observed that ISO is moving towards what should be better exchange over the web, but I'm still hesitant to like and see where the terminology is heading, because we have so many differences in how we understand concepts and how we understand the language at all. And I think ISO TC211 is short of publishing their understanding of the words or concepts.
Jan?
Thank you. Ivana, when you said ISO is short of publishing the standards and the terms, do you think that what is done by the online ISO online browsing platform and Geolexica is too little effort, or should there be strengthened in that work?
No, I think that's a great effort from ISO, but it's, as you know, it's too late. So our standards at ISO TC211 are much more dynamic, because they change, and sometimes also in terms and definitions, and there are lots of amendments, and probably they get populated at OBP, ISO's OBP, promptly enough after the standard is published, but the publishing procedure is just too slow.
Jakob.
I like also to agree on the importance to make it easily available. So we run a project, here's a link, for mapping between terminologies in the library domain for several years, and most of the work was first to find out where to get the vocabularies, get as most as possible information, and the same for mappings. Often there are some mappings, but only shared internally or in an Excel spreadsheet. And yeah, so make it machine readable or smart, like it was already said, as best as possible is very crucial in my opinion.
Thank you. More comments?
Perhaps.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I'm a land surveyor by education, so the terminology is something which came very late. But I'm thinking of how should terminology issue be introduced to the survey, included in the surveying studies. And then I would put the question more general. How do you think that terminology issues could or should be included into academic educations from the various disciplines? Are there good examples to follow, or is the situation so open, so new that we should wait some years until we try to introduce terminology issues in the education? Thank you.
I'm not working in the academic sector, but I guess some other participants. Yes, please, Ivana.
I do work in the academic sector, and I can tell only this, that whenever we start to speak about standards, everybody falls asleep. It's just such a boring subject, I think. But then when we start to teach them how to do stuff, and we refer to standards, how these things are defined, where they can be found, I find students are really willing to actually look up the definitions and just to make themselves comfortable with the words they use. But I still would like to go back to what I said before, that many of our terms, I know there is ISO OBP, so was that, Reese, please correct me, I'm not sure what this abbreviation stands for, but
Yeah,
this is
that's the online browsing platform that ISO
yes,
has. Yeah, right.
so it's the OBP stands for online browsing platform, and not for terms and definitions, or for dictionary or vocabulary or whatever it could refer to at ISO. So students aren't really sure what to call things, but they are happy to look them up if these are accessible.
Yeah, there's a lot of different stuff out there on the OBP, and I use the OBP in conjunction too with the repository that I manage for the TC, and of course then our published terms are being placed into the Geolexica platform as I described in my presentation, and you've used that, and a lot of people within our TC or within the geospatial domain have used that. So, but the online browsing platform, of course, doesn't have our informative translations are not inside of the online browsing platform. So that's where our content in the multilingual glossary and the presenting that content through Geolexica is really helpful, and that's the feedback that we've been getting. Of course, there's a lot more to that feedback there, Ivana, and how we want to do that, how we want it to evolve. Yeah, but there's a lot of content in the online browsing platform that could be important. So yeah.
Yes, of course, and I love that platform, and I use it all the time, and also Geolexica because it's much more usable. But what Eric was hinting at was that how does it translate to those that really should be using these terms and concepts or standards for the matter? They don't know there is any ISO OBP whatever that stands for, and I'm not going to ask you again for the abbreviation. You see, so what I'm saying, and in this workshop, which was amazing, I think, is that we all need to acknowledge that ISO standards, or OGC standards for the matter, are not accessible to those that really should be using them. They are accessible for people that want to improve them, but not for those that need to use them.
Hi, this is Ron. Since Ivana has, spoken so much, I'd like to echo what Ivana has also mentioned in chat earlier, that the key point is that even though with the MLGT today and with Geolexica, it is a change in the representation. There is enhancement. So for example, there is machine readability, there are additional relationships that you can follow, but in terms of the usage, it's not sufficient for people to fully realize the benefits and to use them in a practical way. I would say that there are two main reasons for this. The first reason is that the MLGT itself is organized under the ISO governance structure. And as we know that, as Folkart has mentioned in the chat, that standards cost money, and ISO is very concerned about that. And therefore, there's also, because ISO is a large governing organization, it has very strict, I guess, standards development rules on what is possible, what is not, what kind of processes need to happen for something that gets published, and where those things can be published. And therefore, there's a lot of restriction on how things can be used, how things can be changed, or how things could be used, just in general. So modern models like crowdsourcing, or even agile feedback, things like this are very difficult under this structure. And when we talk about concepts, not only just in the definitions of concepts, because a lot of times we cannot agree on a certain concept across different domains. There are just many of these situations where either it's across domain or across languages, the concepts can differ. So when we talk about mappings between domains or between languages, it's not a clear-cut manner. We can't always find a common thing to agree on. We can't always harmonize, which is to change the concepts. We can't always generalize, because some concepts just belong in different hierarchies, with different historic reasons, or in different domains, there's different reasons why people use different terms. We can't deal with all of them at the same time. For example, if we want to harmonize a concept. So, it's necessary to work on those mappings, but when we do mappings, it is also necessary to have those mappings get agreed upon, because, what I say about your terms or what I say about your concepts may not agree with what you say about my concepts. And, the mappings may not actually facilitate interoperability. For example, if I have a set of terms that are mapped to yours with different relationships than what you believe that they map to, then it could cause confusion for people who use those terms. And I think today, with some of the ontology languages, it may not fully facilitate the level of detail that is necessary for this, as well as the administrative information that is necessary for the governance of these things. And especially when in chat, we also have seen how concepts can drift. The concept definitions in domains can drift, and therefore the mappings will drift, because when the concept drifts, the mapping is directly affected. We can't have, meanings that change that, if someone is using that mapping, it would eventually be a wrong mapping. So these are things that we need to be aware of, and we need to find a way to deal with these administrative issues. I don't know if ISO is the right place to do it, or maybe there should be a separate place that doesn't have the restrictions that ISO has to do something like that. From what I understand, in the ISO Smart project, it is possible to perhaps propose changes to ISO, but again, we don't know how many years that's going to take, and we don't know how much change ISO Council is willing to accept. I think an organization like OGC, which is a lot more agile, which I've been telling people, could potentially do things a lot faster. But OGC is, again, it's open geospatial. It's about the geospatial world. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong about geospatial, but it begs the question, whether something more generic is necessary. Sorry for the long rant.
No, it's okay. That's fine. Ivana, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I was just wanting to react to what Ron was saying, and also to what Rob was putting into the chat, that I see that there is a terminological disparity between the two organizations, and that actually displays itself into users community, so nobody knows what to understand of what terms. And I think looking at this workshop, where we need to head into is to actually try to make an order among our terms, where we are a little bit short, because the technology is there to display our terms, and might this be OBP accessible from the web, or making a little bit more saying which terms, such as data set or data relate to which terms, might help to the users.
Yeah, Agneta wrote a question earlier in the chat. Do we have a common understanding of what the geospatial community, or at least the participants, want to achieve, or at least a couple of priority items on our joint wish list? Maybe I should start here. What we noticed is that people often find it hard to reuse the definitions from ISO, because they are perhaps perceived as not clear enough, or people don't understand them. They are perhaps too abstract, too general. It's also a bit related perhaps to what we wrote in our presentation, that if you want people to really understand the concept you're using, then having a concise definition is not enough. People learn by examples, by having notes, explanatory text, by building up on prior knowledge. So by relating the concepts they try to learn to concepts they already learn. I was wondering if that perhaps also is relates to the question of Erik. So how do you introduce terminology? Well, I agree. It probably doesn't help to just give them a list of terms, right? I mean, how do you study a list of terms? Any reaction to what I said, or what Agneta said, Rob?
So I'm not sure that you're inviting me, but I put my hand in there. From the OGC perspective, we've had a set of policies and procedures, and we've established a thing called the OGC Naming Authority, which is similar to the terminology, but it's different in that all it does is it takes the input from the various standards working groups and makes sure that we have we identify candidate web addresses for terms. And the big advantage of that is not only that it means we can go directly to publishing the definition of those terms, but the web addresses are unique. It forces disambiguation, and the responsibility lies in the standards developers to undergo that disambiguation before they come to us with a proposed URI. So I think that's helpful, because if you just leave it to terminology, you're deferring the question about what the intent is, whether that's the same as anything else that you already have in use or not. I'm sure that there's equivalence in the various registration procedures and so forth inside OGC, but I do think that the issue of having the formal URI means that we can make those terms reusable outside. The problem we find with ISO is that we don't really have a canonical URI available for most of the ISO terms, and therefore it's the citations can live in text, but they're not really readily discoverable from the outside. So we're certainly hoping to work through building better linkages between terms in standards and equivalent ISO things. But yeah, but without that unambiguous web address, life is much harder.
Reese or Ron, do you want to react on that in relation to Geolexica?
Oh, Ron can maybe say something there, because he's the one who developed the platform. So
Sure. I was just hoping that Reese could say something.
so please,
So,
Ron. go ahead.
I'll start
Go
off
ahead.
first.
Go
So
ahead.
my
Go ahead.
comment was that I fully agree with Rob, and given that Rob and us we work closely together on other things. There is actually an RFC 5141 from the ITF that describes a URN scheme for ISO content. So technically, it is possible to identify ISO content, especially for terms and definitions. You can provide the clause and a version number or an edition number in the URN, and this RFC was originally written by Joe Goodwin, who happens to be also on this call. But I agree with Rob that it doesn't facilitate discoverability, because that URN scheme is not designed to be resolvable. So to echo what Heidi just mentioned, Reese and I in Geolexica, we've been trying to have a persistent URL for the different concepts that exist. For example, in the MLGT, each of those have a persistent URL that is generated from the concept ID of that particular entry originating from the MLGT. So that link, that identifier would facilitate to some extent retrievability and the identification of things, and to some extent some discoverability, but it's not at the level that Rob would think it's useful. So there's still a long way to go on how we can make these things more discoverable and more linkable. But yeah, I think it's echoing the thoughts earlier. I think it may be a good time to expand beyond geospatial, because I think geospatial is a great use case, and given that ISO and OGC has put in a lot of resources into making terminology work, but we're also seeing a lot of other domains, or broader or narrower domains. We see that NATO, they've given a very fantastic presentation here, and we know that in IEC, the IEV, the Electropedia, as well as the other terminology databases, they also have a terminology glossary that has over 50,000 or 60,000 concepts. So there's a lot of this information out there that standardization bodies have been trying to manage, but have not been able to make them actually useful. So they are useful in an extent that it's just like a dictionary on your desk, but in terms of facilitating technology in using them in a machine readable way, or through automation, that has not happened yet. And maybe this workshop would be a good way to kick off something like that. Maybe Reese could say something now.
No, I agree though, Ron, about the the geospatial domain. So that's where we come from. But the workshop was organized with the intent to get experts together from domains outside of geospatial, not only geospatial. So we'd like to hear from those other people. And yeah, so thank you, Heidi.
Yes, Eric has his hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. Now I would continue what Rob said about linking between OGC and ISO. I think it's possible, and it takes some time. This is the experience from Calata, but it is indeed possible, and we work to continue on that step. When it comes to what could be used, I mean, the dictionary is lying on the table, and who is using it? There's the situation in that countries have have made national standardization of their cadastral processes. And so you have elements of standards, but not according to international standards. Now, recent research has demonstrated the possibility of what is called schema matching. And that is a very promising way to go. Which would allow data sets which are specified into according to one standard to transform it in by machines to a data set structured according to another standard. So that would be one application area. And another application area, as I see it, is machine translation. I would imagine that machine translation would benefit from vocabularies, controlled vocabularies in one way or another. But that is a research area which has to be developed more. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the comments. Do we have more people who want to add to this discussion? Perhaps in the meantime, just reacting on a comment from, I think it was Volkert, saying that the ISO terminology standards allow a field for notes and examples. Yes, that is actually a practice we use a lot in the Danish modeling rules, that you should use a lot of notes and examples to enhance understanding. That is also what we did when we developed this new dataset definition. We had a lot of notes to add extra things, saying typically what would you find in a data set. We actually also wrote as we mentioned, a discussion paper elaborating more and giving like specific examples. But what we saw in the feedback was that a lot of people said, but so many notes, do we really need all those notes? And that led us to the thinking that, okay, it's really depending on the context. If you have a standalone glossary, then it's really good to have all the notes. But if you have a standard, for instance, then a lot of the context explaining how the concept relates and giving some of those notes and examples is actually in the standard document. And then we're back to discussion that the rest of the standards is not free. So you don't get the context, you only get the very concise definition. That's all you get when you don't have access to the standard. And it's a bit the same, I think, if you have, for instance, data models, so where you would see from the data model how it relates to other concepts. But if you only reuse the definition of a certain class in another context, then you don't get the context again. So yeah, it depends a bit on how you use all the terms. Yes, Volker, please go ahead.
Well, I can only speak from my NATO experience, of course. In our daily experience, the use of node fields is useful because, as you say, you know, it's one thing finding a definition in its context in a source publication, whether that's a standard or some other publication. And it's another thing finding the definition in a database with thousands and thousands of other definitions without any context. And so, yes. What we have done is we have a taxonomy for our definitions that we try to apply to give it some context. The field for the notes also allow for some context or for other information that does not necessarily explain the nature of the concept, so you know what it is, and we actually try to discourage the use of notes, but we allow it for you know, just to give for flexibility essentially. So that's it.
Thank you, Reese.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So the idea about the notes and those kind of you know, ancillary information, Ron and I have discussed that a little bit about some of the things there with the Geolexica platform that we're using for the MLGT, and we've actually considered if there could be a way of having, you know, like community or crowdsourced, you know, information if you want to add some additional text or commentary to these things. And by having an online or a digital representation of these glossaries, these entries, terminology things, we can do that, and you can limit that view. You can show, of course, the official formatted view, and you can show views of things with these additional, you know, crowdsourced or community contributed information. And of course, some applications and some domains, they don't want that, and we understand that. But in the case of other things, it could be helpful. It could really be as an educational, you know, aspect of it. And I think this can all be controlled through software and through the interface and those kind of things. So thank you.
Ivana?
Yes, I just want to react to Rob's recent chat input, and that was about or referring to accessibility of ISO ontology model. And I'm not sure if this is the platform to ask about this, but I'm also curious that, you know, at ISO TC211, we have our ontologies, and they are not accessible. They are for download, and thereby they can't be actually mapped to other concepts. So is there any thought, maybe Agneta or Mats or Peter could tell us what's the future prospect of making this accessible to the other web?
Agneta here, thank you for the question. I would like to forward the question to Committee Manager Mats Olin, but generally speaking, ISO TC211 has a high ambition of making as much as possible accessible to users. I mean, we want to be user-oriented and user-friendly. We are on the user side. However, we also are under the, we need to, we are under the ISO directives and the rules that are set out there. So we are sort of between, I don't know the English expression, but we are between two forces here. So we're doing the best we can to make as much as possible, as much things as possible available out there. Besides, I mean, the standards, we have different resources, right? The terminology is one resource. We have the ontology, we have UML models and things. And we are actually now in a ongoing and deep discussion with ISO how to resolve this. But I would like Mats, committee manager, if you have some more details to share.
I could try. I'm definitely not the expert on the area, but we have recently had a new ontology convener assigned, Nick Carr from Australia. And to me, it sounds like he first want to do some sort of what do you call it? Do an inventory check on what we have and see the status of them before he moves them to a more readily accessible format. He's done this voyage within OGC, so I think we will see that we will align a lot of what's happened in the OGC the last couple of years will be the same movement that we would see within TC211. But we are not there yet, as Agneta said, and we do have we do have some work to do before we get there.
Rob?
Yes, just to let everybody know, I mean, Nick Carr is a colleague of mine. I wear two hats. I have two half-time jobs, one with the OGC, and I work with Nick on another one. So we're in close contact around this whole issue of ontology publication. It's actually some of the meta models rather than the TC211, which are the geospatial standards, which are probably more interesting in the short term. Like, for example, the terminology model that the Glossarus and so forth uses that represents that best practice. I haven't actually seen a ontology expression of that at any stage. And you know, I have looked for it several times. I looked again just then. So I think some of those things, just for handling the metadata around terminology, is important. And also, you know, like most organizations, there are multiple people doing things, and there's work being done inside OGC on documentation, automation of the documentation for standards. And my hope is that managing the definition server, I would start seeing these rich versions of terminology definitions coming to me to publish. The definition server infrastructure is fully capable of handling that. The conversation with Nick is in train about the consistency, but we're still missing some of these glue pieces.
Thank you, Rob. Ivana, you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump into that when Rob said that the next ontology working group convener is inclined to actually publish these on the web. Do you think, Rob, that by publishing ISO TC211 ontologies, we get a step forward to alignment of terminology? And maybe you responded before, but I didn't get that, so sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, because it will give us the opportunity to make statements about things being equivalent in a machine-readable form. At the moment, we can't do that. All those statements are buried in text only. So there are ontologies out of the ISO 19150 work, I think it is. Was it 160? One's addressing ones. But those things were machine generated, and they are not terribly helpful in their form. They have they're not independent modules. You end up having to download half a gigabyte of ontologies for the most simple basic things, and they're not actually self-consistent. So there needs to be better modularity of the publishing artifacts so that they become reusable. So I guess yeah, it's a good start, but we need to sort of move to a more a fair approach. We need to have accessibility and reusability designed into those publication processes.
Yeah, if I may jump into that, sorry, Heidi, for jumping into your moderation. But, you know, Rob, we at ISO TC211 have quite verbose definitions. Do you think this is machine readable as soon as it gets exposed to the web?
Look, there's no problem with any amount of detail. The problem is just having a canonical way of expressing that detail. The ability for some machine to interpret that is a different matter, but machine readability is easy.
Yeah, but if you machine readable encode a long text, how does machine make sense out of it? And I think I'm getting back to our original discussion in this workshop. That how does machine going to know what's the difference between nicely or less nicely put definition?
There's probably a whole bunch of experts here on that subject, but I just wanted to make the distinction between machine readability and optimal design for machine understandability. They're different things, I believe. Others may disagree with me, but I'm probably not expert enough to to argue the point.
Hi, this is Ron. I agree with Rob, and I understand what Ivana is trying to reach at, is that maybe if a sentence or a definition is too long, how can a machine interpret what that actually means in terms of semantics? I think there are constructs that we could create in order to make a machine understand that. So maybe instead of it's a sentence, it's actually a data structure that facilitates semantic understanding. So maybe each of those words, or the combination of that, is a semantically built data structure. So instead of exchanging text, we would be exchanging semantic constructs that actually directly link to concepts and meaning. I think something like that would facilitate the machine understandability of what this concept actually means, and provides us extra relationships that a concept could link to for discoverability. And I know that we don't have much time left, but there's one extra topic that could be further discussed in maybe the second day. For example, there's this in TC 184 in ISO SC4, they have this ongoing debate on what constitutes a term. For example, in the generic sense, maybe you have a term that is called industrial data. And this in ISO would be considered a clause 3 term. But you could also have a model term. For example, it's a name of a model that is intended to model industrial data. And these two terms, one in English and one in perhaps, it's from an express data model, or it's from SSML or UML model. These, both could be considered terms, but they kind of exist on a different ontological plane. And currently in ISO, I don't know if any other standards bodies have encountered this problem, but I know in ISO, there's definitely no guidance on what constitutes a term. So their approach sometimes would be, to include all of that together in clause 3 or put them in a separate clause. And I know that in TC211, there's also this kind of issue where you have, platform independent terminology, but sometimes you also have platform specific terminology, or, terminology that is specific to a model or some kind of subdomain of geospatial information. So the management and organization of these and how we make these relationships clear is an area that has not been addressed so far, and it is probably time that we consider and think about a good solution for that.
Thank you. And I'm going to stop the discussion here because we're running out of time. Reese, would you like to wrap up?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Heidi. Yes, we've had a really wonderful and a really active and detailed discussion today, and the presentations. We couldn't have hoped for so many people to, register and have interest. So we know there's, in the beginning, we weren't quite sure how many people sign up. So we were just so surprised to see so many people with an interest in this subject. So it's just wonderful to welcome you all today. And we look forward to seeing you back here again. Different time, but we'll follow through with our agenda for day 2. And then we're going to have another discussion, and that's going to take place on the 15th. So please be sure to check the website and also the agenda for any changes. I don't have anything else to add. Heidi, Jan, you guys okay there? Ron?
No, I don't have anything
Yes?
to add. Just want to
Right.
say thank you all.
Yes, thank you all. Agneta, Peter, thank you for joining and being there today. Mats, thank you also for your support from the committee and the secretariat. Thank you. And thanks to all of the participants and presenters.
Reese and all the organizers, thank you very much.
Oh, you are welcome. We're not done yet. So
Wonderful
come back.
opportunity to meet you.
So yeah, thank you. Thank you. So it's sort of the first time to run a meeting with so many people and so kind of got to make sure everything runs smooth. But thank you all for your patience and really appreciate that. Okay, so I think we'll just, I'm going to save the chat. I'm going to stop the recording. That stops when the meeting is basically finished. So yeah, thank you all very much, and we'll see you. I'm going to stay on the line here and chat with organizers, Heidi and Jan and Ron, for a second. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you on the 15th.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Peace.
Yes, thank you. You're welcome. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank
Yes,
you.
Eric, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.